your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Rob Mitchell had built his life on two principles: loyalty and strength. At 42, he carried himself with the measured precision of a man who had seen combat in 3 different countries and survived worse than most people could imagine. His weathered hands, scarred from years as a special forces operative before transitioning to private security consulting, now spent their days building something he thought would last forever: a family. The Mitchell household on Maple Street looked like every other suburban dream. Rob had purchased the 2-story colonial with cash after his final overseas contract, determined to give his wife Linda and their 8-year-old daughter Emma the stability he'd never known growing up in foster care. Linda, with her honey blonde hair and doe eyes, had seemed like salvation when they met 6 years ago at a charity gala. She was volunteering at the children's booth, and Emma, then 2 and recently adopted by Rob as a single father, had immediately gravitated toward Linda's gentle demeanor. What Rob didn't see then, blinded by hope and loneliness, was the calculated way Linda assessed his bank account, his property, his potential. Linda Reeves had grown up in a family where appearance mattered more than substance, where her mother taught her that a woman's security came from the man she could catch, not the life she could build. At 28, when they married, Linda was already perfecting the art of being whatever someone needed her to be. Their marriage had been comfortable, if not passionate. Rob worked long hours consulting for corporate security firms, building a reputation that commanded premium rates. Linda managed their social calendar, joining the right neighborhood committees, befriending the right wives. Emma thrived in school, her natural intelligence shining despite the trauma of her early years in the system. But comfort had bred carelessness in Linda. The thrill of playing the perfect wife began to wear thin, especially when Rob's work demanded frequent travel. That's when Derek Phillips entered their orbit. Derek was everything Rob wasn't: smooth where Rob was direct, charming where Rob was intense, weak where Rob was strong. He'd moved to their neighborhood 8 months ago, taking over his deceased father's struggling accounting firm. At 35, Derek was divorced, attractive in a non-threatening way, and desperately insecure beneath his practiced smile. He'd noticed Linda immediately at the neighborhood barbecue, the way she seemed restless despite her perfect life. Their affair began with stolen glances across the yard during block parties, progressed to afternoon coffee while Rob traveled, and culminated in afternoon encounters at Derek's office above the old bank building downtown. Linda told herself it wasn't serious, just excitement, something to fill the void of a marriage that had become predictable. Rob sensed something had shifted. Linda's laughter seemed forced, her affection mechanical. She developed new interests: yoga classes that ran late, book clubs that met frequently, volunteer work that demanded odd hours. But Rob had learned in the military that suspicion without evidence was poison, so he waited, watched, and hoped he was wrong. The first real crack appeared 3 weeks ago when Emma came home crying from her Aunt Carol's house, Linda's sister who lived across town. Carol's twin boys, both 10 years old, had pushed Emma off their trampoline, calling her names about being adopted. When Rob confronted Linda about it, she dismissed it as kids being kids and suggested Emma was too sensitive. But Rob knew his daughter. Emma was resilient, tougher than most kids her age had to be. If she was crying, someone had crossed a line. That night, he began paying closer attention to everything: Linda's phone calls, her schedules, the way she avoided his eyes when she spoke. The pattern became clear with sickening clarity. Linda was closest to Carol, who'd been covering for her sister's indiscretions for months. Carol's boys were parroting things they'd overheard their mother saying about Emma, about Rob, about their family. The cruelty toward Emma wasn't random childhood bullying. It was learned behavior from adults who had lost respect for Rob and his family. Rob's hands tightened around his coffee mug as he sat in his study that evening, pieces of betrayal clicking into place like the components of a weapon he'd assembled too many times to count. Outside, Linda was tending her garden, humming softly, oblivious to the storm gathering behind his quiet eyes. Emma burst through the front door, backpack dragging behind her, her face flushed with excitement about something that happened at school. In that moment, watching his daughter's pure joy, Rob felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Whatever Linda had done, whatever she was planning to do, Emma would be protected. And anyone who threatened that protection would learn exactly why Robert Mitchell had earned his reputation in places where mercy was a luxury no one could afford. The foundation of their perfect suburban life was about to crumble, and Rob would be the one holding the sledgehammer. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. The neighborhood block party was Linda's idea, as most social gatherings were. She'd spent the morning arranging flowers and preparing her famous potato salad, playing the role of perfect hostess with practiced ease. Rob watched her from the kitchen window as she flitted between neighbors, her smile bright and engaging, her laughter carrying across the yard. Derek Phillips arrived fashionably late, carrying a bottle of expensive wine and wearing the kind of casual confidence that came from knowing he belonged. Rob observed the subtle dance between his wife and the newcomer. The way Derek's eyes found Linda immediately, how she seemed to glow under his attention. The carefully orchestrated coincidental moments when they ended up near each other. Emma spent most of the party playing with the younger kids, but Rob noticed how she avoided her cousins, Carol's twin boys Jason and Kyle. When the boys started a game of tag, Emma hung back, suddenly finding reasons to help Linda with serving duties instead of joining the fun. "She's being antisocial," Carol commented to Linda, loud enough for Rob to hear. "Maybe she needs to learn to toughen up a bit. My boys could teach her." Rob set down his beer with deliberate control. "Emma's fine the way she is." Carol's smile was sharp around the edges. "Of course she is. But sometimes kids need to learn the real world isn't going to coddle them. Especially kids who, well, you know how it is." The pause before "you know how it is" hung in the air like a slap. Rob felt his jaw tighten, but Linda quickly intervened with nervous laughter. "Carol, don't be silly. Emma's just tired from school." But Rob caught the look that passed between the sisters, complicit, knowing. They discussed Emma before, probably in ways that would make his blood boil if he knew the details. The party continued without incident until Derek offered to help Linda clean up. Rob was talking to their neighbor Mike about contractor recommendations when he noticed the easy familiarity between Derek and Linda as they moved around each other in the kitchen. Derek knew where the dishes belonged, where Linda kept the serving spoons. He'd been in their kitchen before, often enough to learn the layout. That night, after Emma was asleep and Linda was taking one of her increasingly long baths, Rob did something he'd sworn he'd never do. He went through her phone. The messages were carefully deleted, but Linda had never been particularly tech-savvy. Rob's military training included digital forensics, and it took him less than an hour to recover 3 months of conversations that painted a picture of betrayal so complete it took his breath away. "Derek, missed you today. When's your husband traveling again?" "Linda, next week. 3 days in Atlanta. We'll have the afternoons." "Derek, can't wait to have you to myself. This sneaking around is getting harder." "Linda, I know. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if we just didn't have to hide anymore." "Derek, Rob would destroy both of us. Guy give me the creeps. Like he's always watching, waiting for something." "Linda, he's not as tough as he pretends. All that military stuff is just for show. He's actually pretty predictable." The messages went deeper, uglier. Linda complaining about Rob's cold nature, his obsession with Emma, his paranoid attention to detail. Derek feeding her resentment, painting himself as the understanding alternative to Rob's intensity. But the message that made Rob's vision narrow to a tunnel of pure rage was from 2 weeks ago. "Linda, Emma keeps asking questions about why we don't spend time with her anymore. Maybe we should back off for a while." "Derek, the kid's not even yours by blood. Why let her control your life?" "Carol's right. You've babied her too long." "Linda, you're right. She needs to learn the world doesn't revolve around her. Maybe spending time with Jason and Kyle will teach her some resilience." Rob set the phone down with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of controlling the violence that wanted to explode from his chest. They'd been using Emma as a pawn, deliberately exposing her to Carol's boy's cruelty to teach her resilience. His daughter, who'd already survived abandonment and the foster system, was being tortured for the convenience of his wife's affair. He sat in his study until dawn, staring at the wall where Emma's artwork hung next to her school photos. By the time Linda came downstairs for her morning coffee, Rob had made a series of decisions that would change everything. "I'm taking Emma to Carol's this afternoon," Linda announced, not meeting his eyes. "The boys want to play, and I think it's good for her to interact with family." Rob nodded slowly. "Good idea. Maybe I'll come along." Linda's coffee mug paused halfway to her lips. "Oh, you don't need to do that. I know you're busy with work." "I'm never too busy for Emma." Linda forced a smile. "Of course not. I just meant Carol's boys can be a handful. You might find it stressful. I think I can handle a couple of 10-year-olds. Something flickered in Linda's eyes. Calculation, concern. But she nodded and turned away, her phone already buzzing with what Rob knew would be frantic messages to Derek about the change in plans. That afternoon, Rob would finally see the full scope of his family's betrayal. And Linda, Derek, and everyone who'd enabled them would learn that Robert Mitchell's reputation for being dangerous wasn't military mythology. It was a promise. Chapter 3. The Revelation. Carol's house sat on 3 acres outside the main neighborhood, giving her boys plenty of space to run wild. The property backed up to dense woods, and Carol had often bragged about the natural playground it provided for active children. Rob had always found the isolation unsettling, but now, pulling into the gravel driveway with Linda and Emma, it felt ominous. Carol greeted them at the door with her usual brittle enthusiasm. At 34, she was Linda's older sister by 2 years, with the same blonde hair but harder edges around her eyes and mouth. Her ex-husband had left 18 months ago, citing irreconcilable differences, though Rob suspected Carol's volatile nature and drinking problem had been the real catalysts. "Rob, what a surprise," Carol said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Linda didn't mention you were coming." "Last-minute decision," Rob replied, watching how Carol's gaze darted to Linda with something approaching panic. Emma hung close to Rob's side as they entered the house. The living room was cluttered with video game controllers, empty soda cans, and the general chaos of unsupervised children. Jason and Kyle were sprawled on the couch, their attention fixed on a violent video game that seemed inappropriate for their age. "Boys, Emma's here," Carol announced. Kyle glanced over, his expression shifting to something unpleasant. "Great, the baby's back." "Kyle," Carol said without conviction, making no real effort to correct him. Jason paused the game and turned to face Emma fully. "Mom says you're not really part of our family anyway. Dad says Uncle Rob got stuck with damaged goods." The words hung in the air like physical blows. Emma's face crumpled, but before Rob could respond, Linda laughed nervously. "Kids say the darndest things, don't they?" Rob felt something fundamental shift inside him. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd trusted with his daughter's well-being, was standing there making excuses for deliberate cruelty toward an 8-year-old child. His child. "Emma, why don't you go play in the backyard?" Linda suggested. "The boys can show you their new trampoline." Emma looked up at Rob with pleading eyes, but Linda was already ushering her toward the back door. "Go on, sweetheart. Have fun." Rob followed them outside, his senses heightened in the way they'd been trained during reconnaissance missions. Carol poured herself a large glass of wine despite it being only 3 in the afternoon, and Linda checked her phone constantly, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The boys led Emma to the large trampoline set up near the tree line. What happened next will be burned into Rob's memory forever. "Only real family gets to go first," Jason announced, climbing onto the trampoline. Kyle followed, and they began jumping aggressively, making the surface unstable. "Come on, Emma," Kyle called. "If you can get on, you can jump with us." Emma approached hesitantly. As she tried to climb up, Jason deliberately jumped hard, sending her tumbling backward onto the ground. She landed awkwardly, clutching her arm. "Oops," Kyle said with a laugh. "Guess you're not tough enough." Emma sat on the grass, tears streaming down her face, holding her arm. Rob started forward, but Linda was already moving. "Emma, get up," Linda said sharply. You're fine. My arm hurts, Emma whimpered. You just fell. Stop being dramatic. Linda's voice carried across the yard, and Rob felt his world tilt sideways. This wasn't the loving stepmother who'd read Emma bedtime stories and helped with homework. This was a stranger wearing Linda's face. Carol appeared beside Linda, wine glass in hand. She's a bit sensitive, isn't she? The boys play rougher than that all the time. He's a boy, Linda said, gesturing toward Jason. She must have said something to upset him. The words hit Rob like physical blows. His wife, the woman he'd trusted with everything, was not only failing to protect Emma, but actively participating in her humiliation. Emma looked around the yard, seeking help from the adults who were supposed to protect her. Finding none, she sat there holding her arm, trying not to cry harder. That's when Rob moved. He walked across the yard with deadly calm, his footsteps silent on the grass. He knelt beside Emma, gently examining her arm. It wasn't broken, but it was definitely tender. Boys, he said softly, not looking up from Emma. Come here. Jason and Kyle exchanged glances, suddenly unsure. There was something in Rob's voice that made the air feel dangerous. Now, Rob said, still quiet. They climbed down from the trampoline, moving with reluctant steps. Rob stood slowly, keeping Emma behind him. When he looked at the boys, they instinctively took a step back. His eyes held the kind of cold focus they'd seen in movies, but never experienced in real life. You pushed my daughter, Rob said. On purpose. We were just playing, Jason stammered. No. Rob's voice cut through the excuse like a blade. You hurt her deliberately, and then you laughed about it. Carol hurried over, her wine sloshing. Rob, they're just kids. You're scaring them. Rob ignored her, his attention fixed on Linda. Tell them to apologize. Linda shifted uncomfortably. Rob, maybe we should just tell them to apologize. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Linda looked between Rob and her sister, calculation flickering in her eyes. Finally, she shook her head. They're boys, Rob. Emma needs to learn to handle herself. Maybe she should apologize for disrupting their game. The world went very quiet. Rob could hear his heartbeat, feel the blood moving through his veins. Emma looked up at him with trust and confusion, waiting for him to fix this the way he always fixed things. Rob smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Emma, he said gently. Come here, sweetheart. He picked her up, settling her against his hip. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and he could feel her small body shaking with suppressed tears. Rob looked at Linda for a long moment, memorizing her face. Then he turned and walked toward the house without a word. Rob, where are you going? Linda called after him. He didn't answer. He walked through Carol's house, out the front door, and loaded Emma into his truck. Linda appeared as he was buckling Emma's seatbelt. Rob, don't be ridiculous. We drove here together. Call Derek, Rob said quietly. I'm sure he'll give you a ride. Linda's face went white. What's that supposed to mean? Rob got into the driver's seat and started the engine. Through the windshield, he could see Linda's mouth moving, her hands gesturing frantically. But he was done listening to her voice. As they drove away, Emma finally spoke. Daddy, are we going home? Yes, baby, we're going home. But home was about to become something very different. Because in 48 hours, Rob was going to make a phone call that would change everything. And Linda, Derek, Carol, and everyone who'd participated in hurting his daughter would learn that some men don't just get angry. They get even. Chapter 4, The Call. 2 days after leaving Carol's house, Rob sat in his study with Emma curled up in the chair beside him, reading a book about horses. Her arm was fine. No real damage done. But the emotional impact lingered in the way she stayed close to him, seeking reassurance that the adults in her world could still be trusted. Linda had been trying to normalize the situation ever since they'd returned home. She made Emma's favorite pancakes, suggested a trip to the toy store, and asked repeatedly if Rob was still upset about the silly misunderstanding at Carol's. Each attempt at casual dismissal only deepened Rob's resolve. The phone rang at 3:47 p.m. Rob had been expecting this call. Mr. Mitchell? This is Detective Angela Rodriguez with the State Bureau of Investigation. I need to speak with you about Derek Phillips. Rob glanced at Emma, who was absorbed in her book, then stepped into the hallway. "What about Mr. Phillips?" "Sir, we have reason to believe Mr. Phillips has been involved in some serious financial irregularities. We'd like to discuss your relationship with him and any business dealings you might have had." "I see," Rob said carefully. "When would be convenient? Would this afternoon work? We can meet at our field office, or if you prefer, we can come to you." "The office would be fine. Should I bring an attorney?" "That's your choice, sir. At this point, we're just gathering information. Mr. Phillips listed you as a character reference on some loan applications, so we're talking to everyone who knows him professionally." Rob smiled into the phone. "Of course. I'll be there in an hour." The conversation had been perfectly choreographed because Detective Rodriguez didn't exist. The voice belonged to Maria Santos, a former military intelligence specialist who now ran a private investigation firm in the state capital. Rob had worked with Maria on 3 overseas contracts, and she owed him her life from extraction in Moldova that had gone sideways. Rob had called Maria 3 days ago with a simple request: create a scenario that would require Derek Phillips to come to the local police station for questioning about financial crimes. It didn't need to be real, just convincing enough to get Derek alone and nervous for several hours while Rob set other pieces in motion. Linda was in the kitchen when Rob came downstairs. "I need to run some errands," he told her. "Will you be here with Emma?" "Of course," Linda said, not looking up from her laptop. She'd been typing frantically for the past hour, probably updating Derek about the mysterious developments. Rob kissed Emma goodbye and drove to the strip mall downtown where Derek's accounting office was located. The building was old, with narrow hallways and thin walls, perfect for what Rob had planned. Derek's secretary had left early for a dentist appointment, according to the note on the outer door. Derek himself was nowhere to be seen, which meant Maria's fake police call had worked perfectly. Rob used a key he'd had made weeks ago. Lifting Derek's keys during a neighborhood gathering had been embarrassingly easy, and let himself into the office. Rob had spent 2 decades learning how to disappear evidence, plant false trails, and make people believe things that weren't true. Derek's office computer took less than 20 minutes to compromise completely. Rob installed software that would log every keystroke, record every phone call, and transmit copies of all communications to an encrypted server. But the surveillance equipment was just the beginning. Rob moved through Derek's office like a professional, photographing documents, copying files, and building a comprehensive picture of Derek's life, finances, and weaknesses. What he found was better than he'd hoped. Derek Phillips was drowning in debt. His father's accounting firm was hemorrhaging money. Clients were leaving in droves, and Derek had been borrowing heavily to maintain his lifestyle. More interesting were the corners Derek had been cutting: tax filings that were questionable, client funds that had been temporarily borrowed, relationships with business owners who operated in gray legal areas. None of it was serious enough for actual criminal charges, but all of it was serious enough to destroy Derek's reputation and livelihood if presented correctly. Rob was finishing his work when he heard footsteps in the hallway. He slipped into Derek's private bathroom and waited. Derek burst into his office, talking rapidly on his phone. "I don't understand why they call me down there. They said something about loan applications and character references, but I haven't applied for any loans recently." A pause, then, "Linda, I'm scared. If they start digging into my business, they might find other things that could hurt both of us." Another pause. "No, we can't meet tonight. If they're watching me, we need to be careful. Maybe we should cool things off for a while." Rob smiled in the darkness of the bathroom. Fear was making Derek paranoid, driving a wedge between him and Linda. Phase 1 was complete. Derek ended his call and spent the next hour frantically organizing files and deleting computer records. Each action was being recorded by Rob's surveillance equipment, building a digital trail that would be useful later. When Derek finally left for the day, Rob emerged from his hiding place and made one final addition to the office. A small recording device, virtually undetectable, positioned to capture every conversation Derek had in his office for the next several weeks. Rob drove home as the sun was setting, his mind already moving to Phase 2. Emma ran to greet him at the door, her face bright with excitement. "Daddy, Linda made my favorite dinner, and she said we could watch a movie tonight." Rob hugged his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Over Emma's head, he could see Linda watching from the kitchen doorway, her expression carefully arranged into a mask of domestic contentment. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," Rob said. "Why don't you go pick out the movie while I talk to Linda for a minute?" Emma scampered upstairs, and Linda approached with cautious steps. "How were your errands?" she asked. "Productive," Rob replied. "Very productive." Linda searched his face for clues, but Rob had learned long ago how to reveal nothing when it mattered. He moved past her toward the kitchen, already planning the next day's activities. "Rob," Linda's voice was strained. "Is everything okay between us?" Rob turned back to her, letting his gaze linger on her face. She was still beautiful, still perfectly put together. But now he could see the calculation behind her eyes, the constant measuring of angles and advantages. "Everything's fine, Linda. Just fine." That night, as they watched Emma's movie together on the couch, Rob felt the strange peace that came with absolute certainty. He knew exactly what he was going to do, exactly how each piece would fall. Linda sat beside him, probably believing she'd weathered the worst of his suspicion, planning her next meeting with Derek. She had no idea that her world was about to implode in ways she couldn't imagine. And Derek, sitting in his office 3 miles away, reviewing his files for anything that might interest law enforcement, had no idea that he was already caught in a trap that was just beginning to close. Rob's phone buzzed with a text from Maria, "Package delivered successfully. Target very cooperative and very nervous. Ready for phase 2 when you are." Rob deleted the message and pulled Emma closer as the movie continued. His daughter's laughter filled the room, pure and trusting, reminding him exactly why he was willing to do anything, absolutely anything, to protect her. Chapter 5. The Unraveling. Derek's paranoia grew like cancer over the next week. The fake police questioning had shaken him more than Rob had anticipated, and the surveillance equipment captured a man slowly coming apart. Derek checked his locks 3 times each night, jumped at unexpected sounds, and began drinking heavily after office hours. But it was the phone call from Linda that pushed Derek over the edge. "I think Rob knows." Linda's voice came through crystal clear on the recording device. "He's been different since Carol's house. Watching me, asking strange questions." "What kind of questions?" Derek's voice was strained. "Yesterday, he asked how long I've known you. Today, he wanted to see my phone to look up a restaurant number. He's never done that before. Maybe we should stop seeing each other for a while, just until things calm down." "Derek, I need you to understand something." Linda's voice took on a cold edge that Rob recognized, but Derek apparently didn't. "If Rob finds out about us, he'll destroy both of us. But if you abandon me now, I'll destroy you first." There was a long silence. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I know about your money problems. I know you've been borrowing from client accounts. I know about the tax returns you've been filing. If you want my protection from Rob, you'd better not even think about throwing me away." Rob listened to the recording from his truck, parked outside Derek's office building. Through the second-floor window, he could see Derek pacing behind his desk, looking increasingly frantic. Linda wasn't just an unfaithful wife. She was manipulative, calculating, and dangerous. She'd been collecting leverage on Derek the same way she'd probably been collecting it on Rob. Insurance policies for when relationships became inconvenient. Rob's phone rang. Carol's name appeared on the screen. "Rob, we need to talk," Carol said without preamble. "Linda called me crying this morning. She thinks you're planning to leave her." "Is that so?" "She's worried about Emma. If you divorce Linda, what happens to Emma's relationship with our family?" Rob felt his jaw tighten. "Emma's relationship with your family?" "Well, Linda's been like a mother to her, and the boys have gotten so close to their cousin. It would be devastating to break up that bond." The sheer audacity of the lie took Rob's breath away. Carol was rewriting history, painting Linda as a devoted stepmother and her cruel sons as loving cousins. "Carol, your boys pushed Emma off a trampoline and called her damaged goods." "Oh, Rob, that's not what happened at all." Linda explained everything. Emma misunderstood some typical boy behavior and got her feelings hurt. You know how sensitive she can be. Rob ended the call without another word. Carol and Linda had coordinated their story, creating a version of events where Emma was the problem and Linda was the victim. They were preparing for war, which meant they knew war was coming. That evening, Rob implemented phase 3 of his plan. He waited until Linda was in the shower, then called Derek's office from the house phone. Derek Phillips speaking. "This is Robert Mitchell. I think we need to have a conversation." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "About what?" Derek finally managed. "About my wife. About my daughter. About the choices you've been making." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Derek, I know everything. Every meeting, every message, every lie you've helped Linda tell. The question is whether we handle this like civilized men or whether I handle it my way." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm offering you a chance to minimize the damage. Meet me tomorrow night at the old quarry on Route 9. Come alone, and we'll discuss terms." "Terms for what?" "For how much of your life you get to keep when this is over." Rob hung up and deleted the call from the phone's memory. Upstairs, he could hear Linda singing in the shower, probably planning her next move in what she thought was a chess game she could win. Rob spent the next day making final preparations. He visited 3 different banks, liquidating accounts Linda didn't know existed. He met with his lawyer, updating his will and Emma's custody arrangements. He called his former commanding officer, now retired in Montana, and arranged for Emma to spend her summer vacation there if necessary. Most importantly, he visited Maria Santos at her investigation firm. "I need you to document everything," Rob told her, sliding a thick folder across her desk. "The affair, the financial irregularities, the pattern of abuse toward my daughter. Make it official, legal, and unshakable." Maria flipped through the evidence Rob had gathered. Photos, recordings, financial records, witness statements from neighbors who'd observed Derek's frequent visits to the house. "This is comprehensive," she said. "More than enough for a divorce proceeding." "But Rob, this isn't just about divorce, is it?" "No, it's about making sure they never hurt Emma again, and making sure they never hurt another family." Maria studied his face. She'd seen that expression before, in places where the rules were different and justice was a luxury that civilized society couldn't always afford. "What do you need from me?" "Documentation. When this is over, I want the record to show exactly who they are and what they've done. I want it so clear that no court, no family member, no friend will ever take their side again." That night, Derek called Linda. Rob listened to the conversation through his surveillance equipment, watching Linda pace in their bedroom while she talked. "He wants to meet at the quarry," Derek said. "Linda, I think he's going to kill me." "Don't be ridiculous. Rob's not violent." "You didn't hear his voice. This isn't about talking things through. He knows everything, and he's planning something. So don't go." "And then what?" "You said yourself he'll destroy both of us. At least if I meet with him, maybe I can convince him to let me leave town quietly." Linda was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe that's for the best. Maybe you should leave town." "Are you serious? After everything we've planned? After what you said about protecting each other?" "Derek, I have a daughter to think about. If Rob's as dangerous as you think, I need to prioritize Emma's safety." Even Derek caught the lie in that statement. "You mean you need to prioritize your own safety? Think whatever you want. But if you're smart, you'll disappear before Rob decides talking isn't enough." Derek hung up without saying goodbye. Linda stood in their bedroom for a long moment, then began packing a small bag. She was preparing to run, abandoning Derek to face Rob's wrath alone. Rob watched his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, stuff cash and jewelry into an overnight bag, probably planning to disappear before the meeting at the quarry could take place. She was going to let Derek face the consequences of their affair alone while she escaped to start over somewhere else. But Linda had made one critical miscalculation. She thought Rob's anger was focused on Derek, that removing Derek from the equation would allow her to rebuild her marriage through manipulation and time. She had no idea that Rob's fury wasn't divided between them. It was multiplied by them. And tomorrow night, at the quarry, Derek would learn exactly what happened to men who hurt Robert Mitchell's daughter. But Derek's punishment would be only the beginning. Linda's reckoning was still coming. It would be far worse than anything Derek could imagine. Chapter 6. The Quarry. The abandoned quarry on Route 9 had been closed for 15 years, leaving behind a moonscape of broken stone and dark water. Local teenagers used it for parties and dares, but on weeknight evenings it was deserted, surrounded by dense woods that muffled sound and hid secrets. Rob arrived an hour early, positioning himself with tactical precision. He'd changed into dark clothing and military-grade boots, items he hadn't worn since his last overseas contract. The familiar weight of preparation settled around him like armor. Derek's headlights appeared at exactly 9 o'clock, sweeping across the quarry's entrance with nervous jerks as he navigated the rutted dirt road. Rob watched from the shadows as Derek parked near the water's edge and sat in his car for several minutes, gathering courage or perhaps writing final messages. When Derek finally emerged, he looked like a man walking to his execution. His usual cocky confidence had evaporated, replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of someone who'd finally realized he was outmatched. "Rob," Derek called into the darkness. "I'm here." Rob emerged from behind a pile of broken limestone, moving with the silent precision that had kept him alive in hostile territories. Derek started violently at his appearance. "Jesus Christ, you scared me." "Good," Rob said. "Fear is appropriate right now." They stood 20 feet apart, the dark water of the quarry stretching behind Derek like an open grave. Rob had chosen the positioning deliberately. Derek's back to the water, no easy escape routes, nowhere to run. "Look, Rob, I know what this looks like," Derek began, his words tumbling over each other. "But Linda and we never meant for things to go this far. It just happened, you know? Sometimes people connect and—" "Stop talking," Rob said quietly. Derek's mouth snapped shut. "You've been in my home," Rob continued. "You've been with my wife. You've participated in the psychological abuse of my 8-year-old daughter. And now you're going to stand there and tell me it just happened? The thing with Emma, that wasn't my idea. That was all Linda and Carol. I told Linda she was being too hard on the kid." Rob smiled, and Derek took an involuntary step backward. "You told Linda she was being too hard on Emma? That's interesting, because I have recordings of you calling my daughter not really family and suggesting Linda should stop babying her." Derek's face went white. "Recordings? I've been watching you for weeks, Derek. I know about your financial problems, your drinking, your pathetic attempts to seem important. I know you've been stealing from client accounts and filing fraudulent tax returns. I know you're 3 months behind on your office rent, and that your ex-wife took everything in the divorce because she discovered you were cheating with your secretary." Each revelation hit Derek like a physical blow. He was dealing with a man who'd done more than discover an affair. He was facing someone who'd systematically dissected his entire life. "What do you want?" Derek whispered. "I want you to understand exactly who you've been fucking with," Rob said. "I want you to know that Linda isn't some innocent housewife who got swept away by romance. She's a predator who targeted you because she thought you were weak enough to manipulate and wealthy enough to be useful. That's not true. She's been recording your conversations, Derek, keeping evidence of your financial crimes as insurance. If I'd never discovered the affair, she would have used that information to control you indefinitely. And when she was done with you, she would have destroyed you to protect herself." Derek's breathing was becoming labored. "You're lying." Rob pulled out his phone and played a recording. Linda's voice, cold and calculating, describing Derek's vulnerabilities to Carol. "He's so desperate for affection, he can't see I'm setting him up. If Rob ever finds out, I'll throw Derek under the bus and play the victim. Men like Derek are useful until they become liabilities." Derek staggered as if he'd been shot. "When did she say that?" "Last week, while you were declaring your love and talking about running away together." The sound that escaped Derek's throat was somewhere between a sob and a scream. He'd been played by an expert, manipulated by someone who'd seen him coming from miles away. "Here's what's going to happen," Rob continued. "You're going to disappear. Tonight, you're going to close your business, settle your debts, and leave this state permanently. You will never contact Linda again, never mention Emma's name, and never return to this area. And if I don't," Rob's smile disappeared, "then I'll implement Plan B, which is I'll release evidence of your financial crimes to the state licensing board, the IRS, and every client whose money you've stolen. I'll ensure that Linda's recordings of your conversations are discovered during the investigation. And then, when you're facing federal charges and have no money for legal defense, I'll visit you in prison." Derek was crying now, understanding that his life as he'd known it was over regardless of which path he chose. "Why are you giving me an option to leave?" Derek asked. "Why not just destroy me here and now?" Rob considered the question seriously. "Because destroying you isn't my primary objective. Protecting Emma is. You leaving accomplishes that goal. You staying, in any capacity, forces me to escalate to methods that would upset my daughter." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Derek understood that Rob was offering mercy not for Derek's sake, but to avoid the complications that would come with more permanent solutions. "How do I know you won't come after me, even if I leave?" "Because I keep my word," Rob said. "But Derek, understand this clearly. If you ever threaten my family again, if you ever come near Emma, if you even search for her on social media, I will find you. And when I do, there won't be any conversations or choices. There will just be consequences." Derek nodded frantically. "I'll leave. Tonight. I'll disappear completely." "Good." Rob pulled an envelope from his jacket. "There's $10,000 in cash. Enough to get you started somewhere else. Consider it severance pay." Derek took the envelope with shaking hands. "Why would you help me?" "I'm not helping you. I'm buying insurance that you'll stay gone." Derek stumbled back toward his car, clutching the money like a lifeline. As he reached for the door handle, Rob called out one final time. "Derek?" "Yeah." "Linda's planning to run tonight, too. She's been packing while you were driving here. If you had any romantic notions about riding off into the sunset together, you should probably let those go." Derek's shoulders sagged with the weight of final defeat. He got into his car and drove away without looking back, carrying nothing but cash and the knowledge that he'd been played by everyone who'd claimed to care about him. Rob watched the taillights disappear into the woods, then pulled out his phone. Maria Santos answered on the first ring. "It's done," Rob said. "Derek Phillips will be leaving town tonight. Make sure the financial evidence gets to the appropriate authorities after he's gone. I want his business license revoked and his assets frozen, but only after he's had time to cross state lines." "What about Linda?" Rob looked across the dark water of the quarry, thinking about his wife, packing her bags, and planning her escape. She thought removing Derek would buy her time to rebuild her position, maybe even convince Rob that the affair had been Derek's idea all along. "Linda's punishment is just beginning," Rob said, "and it's going to be much worse than Derek's." Chapter 7. The Trap Closes. Linda was gone when Rob returned home at midnight. Emma was sleeping safely at their neighbor's house. Rob had arranged for a sleepover earlier in the day, knowing tonight would be complicated. The house felt different, empty, as if Linda's absence had lifted a poisonous cloud Rob hadn't realized was there. Linda's hasty packing job told a story of panic and guilt. She'd taken jewelry, cash, and important documents, but left behind photo albums and personal items that would be impossible to replace. This wasn't a planned departure. It was a desperate flight. Rob found a note on the kitchen counter, written in Linda's careful handwriting. "Rob, I need some time to think about our marriage. I'm staying with Carol for a few days while I figure things out. We need to talk about Emma's future and what's best for everyone. I love you both. Linda." Even fleeing in the middle of the night, Linda was still playing games, positioning herself as the thoughtful wife taking space to save their marriage. She had no idea that Rob had anticipated this move and prepared accordingly. Rob's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Linda Mitchell checked into the Riverside Motel on Highway 14 at 11:47 p.m. Room 237. Paid cash for 3 nights. The message was from Tommy Kowalski, a former military police officer who now worked private security in the area. Rob had called in a favor, knowing Linda would avoid Carol's house despite what her note claimed. Linda was too smart to involve her sister in whatever came next. She'd want distance and deniability. Rob spent the next hour implementing the final phases of his plan. Phone calls to strategic contacts, transfer of electronic files, activation of surveillance protocols that had been dormant for weeks. By dawn, Linda would be trapped in a web she didn't even know existed. The next morning, Rob picked up Emma from the sleepover and took her to breakfast at her favorite diner. She was unusually quiet, picking at her pancakes instead of devouring them with typical 8-year-old enthusiasm. "Daddy, where's Linda?" "She had to go visit your Aunt Carol for a few days," Rob said gently. "Sometimes adults need to spend time with their families." Emma nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "Is she coming back?" Rob studied his daughter's face, seeing intelligence and intuition that most adults underestimated. Emma had sensed the tension in their house, the subtle shifts in relationship dynamics that children noticed even when they couldn't articulate them. "Maybe not, sweetheart. How would you feel about that?" Emma considered the question seriously, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Would it just be you and me again? Just you and me. That would be okay," Emma said quietly. "Linda's been different lately. Not mean exactly, but not nice the way she used to be." Rob felt his heart break and heal simultaneously. Emma had noticed Linda's changing behavior, the gradual erosion of affection and protection. His daughter was more perceptive than anyone had given her credit for. "You know what, Em? How about we spend the day doing whatever you want? Movies, ice cream, that bookstore you love." Emma's face brightened for the first time in weeks. "Really? The whole day? The whole day? Just the two of us?" While Emma ran to get her jacket, Rob's phone rang. Maria Santos's voice was crisp and professional. "Linda tried to access the joint accounts this morning. The banks flagged the attempts as suspicious and froze everything pending investigation." "Perfect. What about the other arrangements?" "The private investigator your friend Derek hired never existed. The phone number goes to a disconnected line, and the address was a vacant office building. Linda's going to spend the next few days chasing shadows." Rob smiled grimly. Linda thought she was being clever, hiring someone to investigate Rob's background and find leverage for divorce proceedings. She had no idea that Detective Morrison was actually another of Rob's former colleagues, feeding her false information and documenting her attempts at manipulation. The employment verification checks also came back interesting, Maria continued. "Turns out Linda's been lying about her volunteer work for the past 6 months. The children's charity she claimed to manage? They've never heard of her. The literacy program she supposedly ran doesn't exist. Linda had been creating fictional charitable work to explain her absences while seeing Derek. She'd been building an elaborate facade of community involvement to cover for her affairs. Another layer of deception that painted her character clearly. Maria, I need you to arrange one more thing. Can you have someone deliver a package to Linda at the motel? Nothing threatening, just information she needs to see." "What kind of information?" "Evidence that her escape plan isn't as clever as she thinks it is." That afternoon, while Rob and Emma were at the movies, Linda received a manila envelope with no return address. Inside were photocopies of her bank attempts, photographs of her entering the motel, and a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "Your husband isn't as predictable as you thought. Your lover isn't as loyal as you hoped. Your sister isn't as helpful as you expected. You're alone now, and every move you make is being watched. If you want to negotiate the terms of your surrender, call the number below. You have 24 hours. The phone number belonged to Maria's office, but Linda wouldn't know that. Linda called Carol immediately, her voice shrill with panic. "Carol, something's wrong. Rob knows everything, and he's been planning this. I need help." Carol's response was exactly what Rob had anticipated. "Linda, I can't get involved in your marriage problems. If Rob's really as dangerous as you think, I need to protect my boys. Maybe you should consider going back home and working things out." Linda's support system was crumbling exactly as Rob had engineered. Derek was gone. Her financial resources were frozen, and now her sister was backing away to protect herself. Linda was discovering that the relationships she'd thought she could rely on were all conditional, based on her ability to project strength and stability. That evening, Linda made the call to Maria's number. "This is Linda Mitchell. I received your message. Mrs. Mitchell, my client, is prepared to discuss terms for an amicable separation. Are you interested in hearing his proposal?" "Who is your client?" "I think you know the answer to that question." Linda was quiet for a long moment. "What kind of terms?" The kind that allow you to leave with your dignity intact instead of having your life systematically destroyed piece by piece. But Mrs. Mitchell, this offer expires tomorrow at noon. After that, my client will pursue other options. What other options? The kind that involve federal prosecutors, family court judges, and very public revelations about your character and behavior. The kind that ensure you never get custody or visitation rights with Emma, and that your family and friends understand exactly who you really are. Linda hung up without responding, but Rob knew she'd call back. She was trapped, isolated, and running out of resources. More importantly, she was finally beginning to understand that she'd seriously underestimated the man she'd betrayed. That night, as Rob tucked Emma into bed, she asked the question he'd been dreading. "Daddy, are you and Linda getting divorced?" Rob sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." Emma nodded solemnly. "Is it because of what happened at Aunt Carol's house?" "That was part of it. But mostly it's because Linda and I want different things, and we can't make each other happy anymore." "Will I still get to see her?" Rob studied his daughter's face, looking for signs of distress or attachment that would complicate his decisions. What he saw instead was curiosity mixed with relief. "Do you want to see her?" Emma thought about it seriously. "Maybe sometimes, but not if she's going to be mean to me or make you sad." Rob kissed his daughter's forehead, marveling at her resilience and wisdom. "You know what, Em? I think you and I are going to be just fine on our own." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Rob's phone buzzed with a final message from Maria. "Target accepted meeting for tomorrow morning. She's ready to negotiate." Rob deleted the message and settled into his study to review the divorce papers he'd been preparing for weeks. Linda thought she was walking into negotiations, but she was actually walking into a surrender ceremony. The trap had been set, the prey was cornered, and tomorrow Rob would offer Linda one last choice: accept his terms and disappear quietly, or face the full consequences of betraying a man who never forgot and never forgave. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Linda arrived at the coffee shop on Main Street, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she scanned the room for familiar faces. Maria Santos sat in a corner booth, dressed in a conservative business suit that made her look like a corporate attorney. She'd chosen this location specifically, public enough to feel safe, quiet enough for serious conversation, and close enough to the courthouse to send a subtle message about the legal consequences hovering over Linda's future. "Mrs. Mitchell," Maria said as Linda approached. "Thank you for coming." Linda slid into the booth opposite Maria, her movements sharp with nervous energy. "Where's Rob? My client prefers to handle these matters through representation. I'm Maria Santos, attorney and private investigator. Mr. Mitchell has retained my services to facilitate a clean resolution to your marriage. I want to talk to my husband directly." "That's no longer an option, Mrs. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell has presented you with a choice, and you have exactly," Maria checked her watch, 4 hours to make your decision. Linda's composure cracked slightly. "What decision?" Maria opened a thick folder and began laying out documents with methodical precision. Bank records showing Derek's financial crimes. Photographs of Linda entering Derek's office building at suspicious hours. Transcripts of recorded conversations between Linda and Derek discussing their affair and their cruel treatment of Emma. "The choice is simple," Maria continued. "You can sign the divorce agreement we've prepared, which includes very specific terms about your future behavior and your complete surrender of any claims to Mr. Mitchell's assets or custody of Emma. Or you can refuse, and we'll present this evidence in open court while pursuing federal charges against your former lover for financial fraud." Linda stared at the evidence spread across the table, her face cycling through emotions: shock, fear, anger, and finally, something approaching panic. "This is blackmail." "No, Mrs. Mitchell. Blackmail would involve asking you for money or favors in exchange for silence. This is consequences. You committed adultery, conspired to psychologically abuse a child, and aided a man you knew was committing financial crimes. We're offering you a chance to escape those consequences through voluntary compliance. Linda picked up one of the photographs, herself and Derek embracing outside his office, and studied it with growing horror. How long has Rob been watching me? Long enough to document everything. Your husband is very thorough, Mrs. Mitchell. Military training tends to instill that quality. What are the terms? Maria slid a legal document across the table. Complete dissolution of marriage with no financial settlement for you. Mr. Mitchell keeps the house, all bank accounts, investments, and vehicles. You surrender any claim to Emma's custody or visitation. I helped raise that child for 4 years. You participated in her psychological abuse for months, Maria replied coldly. The recordings make that very clear. Linda read through the document, her face growing paler with each page. This leaves me with nothing. It leaves you with your freedom and your anonymity. The alternative is federal prosecution, public humiliation, and complete social destruction. Your choice. What about Derek? What happened to him? Mr. Phillips chose to relocate rather than face the consequences of his actions. A wise decision, all things considered. Linda set down the papers with trembling hands. Rob planned all of this, didn't he? From the moment he found out about the affair. Mr. Mitchell is a strategic thinker. You betrayed his trust and threatened his daughter's well-being. Did you really think he would respond with forgiveness and counseling? Linda laughed bitterly. I thought I knew him. I thought he was just another suburban husband who would fight for his marriage and try to win me back. You misjudged your husband quite severely. What if I refused to sign? Maria's expression hardened. Then tomorrow morning, federal agents will arrest Derek Phillips for wire fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. During that investigation, they'll discover evidence of your affair and your knowledge of his crimes. The local newspaper will receive copies of all the evidence, including the recordings where you discuss manipulating Emma and planning to frame your husband for emotional abuse if he discovered your relationship. Linda closed her eyes, understanding that every angle had been covered, every escape route blocked. Your family will learn that you've been lying about your charitable work to cover for your affairs. Your friends will discover that you were planning to destroy your husband's reputation to protect your lover. Emma will see documentation of how you really felt about her, including your statement that she was damaged goods who needed to learn her place. Stop, Linda whispered. And your sister Carol will face investigation for child abuse based on her son's treatment of Emma and her participation in covering for your lies. I understand she's already struggling financially since her divorce. Federal scrutiny would probably destroy what's left of her stability. Linda's hands were shaking openly now. Rob hadn't just planned her destruction. He'd engineered the complete collapse of everyone who'd enabled her betrayal. How do I know Rob will keep his word if I sign this? Because Mr. Mitchell's military record shows he's a man who honors his agreements. Sign the documents, disappear quietly, and you'll never hear from him again. Refuse, and you'll discover exactly what he's capable of when someone threatens his daughter. Linda stared at the divorce papers for a long moment, then picked up the pen Maria offered. Where do I sign? Every page that's marked with an X. Initial each paragraph that outlines your behavioral restrictions. As Linda signed away her marriage, her claims to Emma, and her future in their community, Maria made notes in a separate file. Each signature was being documented, creating an unbreakable legal record of Linda's voluntary surrender. There's one final matter, Maria said when Linda finished signing. Mr. Mitchell wants you to understand something clearly. What? If you ever attempt to contact Emma through social media, mail, phone calls, or any third party, Mr. Mitchell will consider that a violation of this agreement. If you ever return to this area or attempt to interfere in Emma's life in any way, the protection this document provides will be null and void. Linda nodded numbly. And Mrs. Mitchell? Mr. Mitchell wants you to know that he'll be monitoring your activities for the foreseeable future, not out of lingering attachment, but out of paternal responsibility. If you ever put another child at risk the way you put Emma at risk, he'll ensure the appropriate authorities are notified. Linda stood to leave, moving like a woman who'd aged years in the span of an hour. At the door, she turned back to Maria with one final question. Will you tell Rob something for me? If it's appropriate, tell him I'm sorry. Not about the affair, that was my choice, but about Emma. She deserved better from me. Linda walked out of the coffee shop and out of Rob and Emma's lives forever. Maria watched through the window as Linda got in her car and drove away, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge that she'd been completely, methodically destroyed by a man she'd thought she could manipulate. Maria gathered the signed documents and called Rob. It's done. She signed everything and she's gone. Any problems? None. She understood exactly what was at stake. Oh, and Rob? She asked me to tell you she was sorry about Emma. Rob was quiet for a moment. Too little, too late. What now? Now, I go home to my daughter and we start over. Clean slate, no looking back. And Linda? Linda made her choices. She'll live with the consequences. As Maria drove toward the courthouse to file the divorce papers, Rob was picking up Emma from school. His daughter ran toward him with the unburdened joy of a child who sensed that whatever dark cloud had been hanging over their family was finally lifting. How was school, sweetheart? Rob asked as Emma buckled her seatbelt. Good. Mrs. Peterson said I could be in the advanced reading group next semester. And guess what? Sarah's mom invited me to their family camping trip next month. Rob smiled, hearing excitement in Emma's voice that had been missing for weeks. That sounds like fun. We'll talk to Sarah's mom about the details. Daddy, are you happy today? Rob looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, seeing her bright eyes and genuine smile. Yes, Em. I'm very happy today. Me too. I feel like everything's going to be okay now. Everything's going to be better than okay, Rob promised. Everything's going to be perfect. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months later, Rob stood in the kitchen of their remodeled home, watching Emma practice piano in the living room. The house felt different now. Lighter, warmer, filled with the kind of genuine happiness that couldn't be manufactured or performed. They'd rearranged furniture, painted walls, and created new traditions that belonged entirely to them. Emma had thrived since Linda's departure in ways that surprised even Rob. Her grades improved, she made new friends, and the quiet anxiety that had shadowed her for months gradually disappeared. Most importantly, she'd stopped walking on eggshells, stopped trying to anticipate adult moods and reactions. Daddy, did I tell you what happened at lunch today? Emma called from the piano bench. No, sweetheart. What happened? Mason tried to take my cookies, so I told him my dad was a soldier and he'd better give them back. Emma grinned. He gave them back really fast. Rob laughed. Em, you can't use my military background to intimidate kids into sharing their lunch. Why not? It worked. Because it's not fair to use fear to get what you want. Emma considered this seriously. But what if someone's being mean and they won't stop? Then you use your words first, get help from a teacher second, and only defend yourself physically if absolutely necessary. What if all of those don't work? Rob set down his coffee and joined Emma at the piano. Then you tell me, and I'll handle it. Like you handled Linda and Derek? The question caught Rob off guard. They rarely talked about Linda anymore, and Emma had never mentioned Derek by name before. What do you mean, sweetheart? I know they were being mean to you and to me, and I know you made them go away. Sarah's mom told her mom that you were a hero for protecting me. Rob felt a complex mix of pride and concern. He'd been careful to shield Emma from the details of Linda's departure, but apparently their small community had drawn its own conclusions about the sudden end of his marriage. Emma, I need you to understand something important. What happened with Linda wasn't about being a hero. It was about making sure you're safe and happy. I know. That's what dads do, right? Protect their kids. That's exactly what dads do. Emma returned to her piano practice, but Rob continued to think about their conversation. The truth was that the last 6 months had been a revelation. Without Linda's subtle manipulations and manufactured drama, both he and Emma had discovered aspects of themselves they'd forgotten or never known existed. Rob had started dating again, cautiously, with Emma's well-being as his primary consideration. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, Emma's pediatrician, had expressed interest during a routine appointment, and their first coffee date had turned into weekly dinners that Emma sometimes joined. Jennifer understood the complexity of dating a single father with a protective nature, and she seemed genuinely fond of Emma rather than merely tolerating her. More importantly, Rob had reconnected with parts of himself that Linda's presence had somehow stifled. He'd started a small consulting business, helping other veterans transition to civilian careers. He coached Emma's soccer team. He'd even begun teaching a self-defense class at the community center, primarily for women and children. The doorbell interrupted his thoughts. Rob opened it to find Maria Santos holding a bottle of wine and wearing a rare smile. "This is unexpected," Rob said. "Come in." Maria entered and waved at Emma, who waved back before returning to her piano. "I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I had some news I thought you'd want to hear in person." They sat in the kitchen while Emma's piano music provided a cheerful background. Maria poured herself coffee from the pot Rob offered and settled back in her chair. "Derek Phillips was arrested in Nevada 3 weeks ago," she began. "Turns out he tried to restart his accounting practice using forged credentials. The Nevada State Board of Accountancy ran a routine background check and discovered his history. Is he facing charges? Multiple federal charges. Tax fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and violation of his professional license restrictions. He's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum." Rob felt a grim satisfaction. Derek had been given a chance to disappear and start over honestly, but his fundamental nature had reasserted itself. Some people never learn from consequences. What about Linda? That's the interesting part. Linda's been living in Phoenix under her maiden name, working as a receptionist at a dental office. No criminal activity, no attempts to contact you or Emma, no social media presence. She's essentially vanished from her old life completely. Rob nodded. Linda had kept her end of the agreement, which was more than he'd expected given her manipulative nature. "There's more," Maria continued. "Carol contacted my office last week. Her boys are in therapy for behavioral problems, and she wanted to apologize to you and Emma for what happened at her house." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that apologies are meaningless without changed behavior, and that any contact with your family would need to go through me first." She understood. Emma finished her piano practice and joined them in the kitchen, climbing into the chair next to Rob. "Are you talking about grown-up stuff?" "We are," Rob said, "but we're almost finished. Can I listen?" Rob looked at Maria, who shrugged. "It's your call." "Emma, Maria is telling me that some people who weren't very nice to us before are being held responsible for their choices. Like when kids at school get in trouble for bullying." Emma nodded seriously. "Good. People should get in trouble when they're mean. But here's the important part," Rob continued. "We don't spend our time thinking about those people anymore. We focus on our life, our happiness, and the people who treat us well." "Like Jennifer and her kids?" Rob smiled. Emma had taken to Jennifer's twin daughters immediately, and the four of them had formed an easy friendship that was slowly developing into something deeper. Exactly like Jennifer and her kids. Maria finished her coffee and prepared to leave. At the door, she turned back to Rob with a final observation. "You know, in all my years doing this kind of work, I've never seen someone implement such a comprehensive response to betrayal. Most people want revenge that's quick and visible. What you did was create long-term consequences that taught real lessons." "I wasn't trying to teach lessons," Rob replied. "I was trying to protect Emma. Same thing in this case. Emma learned that the adults in her life will fight for her. Derek learned that actions have consequences. Linda learned that manipulation has limits. And your community learned that you're not someone to underestimate." After Maria left, Rob and Emma spent the evening cooking dinner together, a new tradition they'd established to end each day. Emma chattered about school, friends, and her plans for the weekend, her voice bright with the confidence of a child who felt completely secure. As they sat down to eat, Emma asked one final question about the conversation with Maria. "Daddy, are you glad Linda's gone?" Rob considered his answer carefully. "I'm glad we're both safe and happy, Em. I'm glad you don't have to worry about adults being unfair to you. And I'm glad it's just you and me figuring out our life together. What if you get married again someday? If I do, it will be to someone who loves you as much as I do and who makes our family stronger, not weaker." Emma smiled. "Like Jennifer?" "Maybe like Jennifer. But that's a decision we'd make together as a team." "I like being on your team, Daddy." "I like being on your team too, sweetheart." As they finished dinner and began their evening cleanup routine, Rob reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, he'd been a man discovering that his marriage was built on lies and his daughter was being systematically destroyed by people who claimed to love her. Today, he was a father who had eliminated every threat to his child's well-being and built a life foundation strong enough to support whatever future they chose to create together. Linda was in Phoenix, living with the consequences of her choices. Derek was in prison, learning that charm couldn't overcome criminal behavior. Carol was in therapy with her sons, hopefully learning to be a better parent and person. And Rob and Emma were home, safe, happy, and free to write the next chapter of their story however they chose. Rob had kept his promise to himself and to Emma. He had protected what mattered most, eliminated what threatened them, and never compromised his principles in the process. Some men forgive and forget. Others ensure that forgiveness becomes unnecessary because threats simply cease to exist. Rob Mitchell had chosen the latter path, and both he and Emma were stronger for it. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility and secured by the unshakable foundation Rob had built through strength, planning, and the absolute refusal to let anyone hurt his daughter ever again. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.